Hey guys, welcome to Unit 0, Lesson 4 for our Algebra, Algebra 1 course. We're going to be talking about adding and subtracting rational numbers. Well, actually, factually, we're barely going to be talking about adding and subtracting rational numbers. We are going to do one example of adding or subtracting. I don't know. I haven't decided yet which one we're going to focus on. Just to remind you about getting a common denominator. And the only reason we're doing that example is because later on we'll do fractions that have full-on expressions with x's and numbers and all kinds of stuff in the denominator. And we'll have to remember that in order to add fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So just to kind of remind you of that and make sure that's in your memory real good, that's what we're going to spend a minute doing, but mostly we're going to take a look at these. We're going to talk about calculators. We're going to talk about how to, or ways to put fractions into these calculators. We're going to look at fraction button and all of those things. We're not going to look at obviously every scientific calculator out there, but we'll give you enough that you can probably figure it out on how to work it on just about any scientific calculator out there. So without further ado, let's jump in. So like I said, let's do one example of adding fractions with different denominators. So our one and only example for this video, is going to be, let's do something simple because we're not trying to make things crazy. Let's do 3/8 minus, how about 1/2? Okay, so the first thing we got to do is get a common denominator, right? And so when we're trying to look at the common denominator, what we want to do is we want to find the LCD, the least common denominator or the least common multiple of the denominator, right? So can we multiply 8 times any whole number and get it to be a 2? Well, no, because it's smaller. Can we multiply 2 times any whole number to get it to be an 8? Yes, we can. So what we're going to do in order to get a common denominator, we're going to multiply this one on the top and bottom times what will turn into an 8. So that would be a 4, right? Because 2 times 4 is 8. So there we go. Now this turns into 3/8 minus 4 times 1 is 4. So 4/8. This is not a bad problem. And if you're good at these, you can probably do this one in the head again, in the head being your head. If you're really good at these, and that's okay. Again, the point is more how to do it and just dust off that cobweb. We're not going to spend much time on this. So on the top, we've got some integer addition up here. So we've got different signs because this one's positive, this one's negative. So we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger one. So our final answer is, whoa, that was kind of cool, but not what I wanted, is negative 1/8. So now let's dive over and take a look at some calculators. Here are our calculators. I apologize in advance if the audio on this particular video is just a little bit wonky. In order to get this video out to people quicker, I am recording this portion just with my camera's built-in audio, which ought to be fairly decent, but that's why it's not quite as good as normal. So we have 3 calculators that we are going to see the fraction button and a few pieces of that puzzle with. I have the TI-30X2S, S standing for solar. I have another TI, the TI-30XS. Multi-view, and then I have the Casio FX115ES Plus Natural VPAM. So these are just kind of a smattering. I wanted to make sure we had TI and a Casio things because those are going to be the most common brands of calculator, and all TIs are going to be vaguely similar-ish on how they handle fractions and decimals and those kind of things. And most Casios are going to be vaguely similar-ish. And then if you get into other stuff, basically what my hope is if you kind of learn what to look for on a calculator, no matter what kind of calculator you have, whether it's one of these or whether it's something else or it's an HP or whatever, all kinds of fancy calculators out there. You should be able to find what you're looking for. You should be able to find a fraction button. I may also do a look in case it doesn't have a fraction button, the kind of the best practice as far as putting fractions in the calculator and whatever. It won't help you much with mixed numbers, but anyway, let's start with the Casio. So the first thing is on this particular Casio, the fraction button is right here, and it looks like that. It's a little fraction, right? And that's usually what you're looking for, is a fraction. Sometimes they have letters, sometimes they have boxes. I'll show you some differences on there. So if I just want to put a regular fraction, like say 3/4, I can do it one of two ways. I can either hit 3 and then fraction button and 4, or I can hit the fraction button and then 3 and then push down to go into the denominator and then push 4. There's usually kind of a little D-pad, like it's called on a video game controller, on the calculator somewhere. And so to get out of the fraction, this is important, because I've seen people, like if you want to add 3/4 plus 1/2, they might put 3/4 and then hit plus 1/2, and then they're like, wait a minute, we've got this weird complex fraction happening, and that's no good. So in order to do 3/4 plus 1/2, we put 3/4, and then you got to make sure and push to the right to get out of that fraction, right? If you want to get back into that fraction and edit it, you can. You just use your little D-pad to get wherever you need to get. And that's pretty much true for all the calculators. You'll see that that's the same thing for the two TIs and whatever else. And then then we can just do plus 1 fraction half equals, and then we get our answer. Now, the next thing I want to show you is that if you get your fraction, you get your answer as an improper fraction. That can be fine and good and all these kind of things. There is almost always a way to get it to spit out, on at least on modern scientific calculators, to spit out a mixed number, for one thing. And so on this Casio, that's this little, you can kind of see it in the little gold section. You if you're watching on a small screen cell phone or something, then it might be kind of small for you to see, but it's got A and B over C to D over C, right? And so if I hit shift on this calculator, it's pretty much always going to match the colors. Like this calculator has a shift and an alpha button, because this calculator actually will do a few more things than those other two calculators that I just showed you. It's got some algebra stuff and whatever else. So for the gold things, you hit shift, and then we hit the mixed number decimal. You see it automatically just shifts it to 1 1/4. And we can do it again and shift back and forth. This one, if we want to go from fraction to decimal, we hit this S to D. And on most Casios, there's a S to D, D to S thing. I assume it's standard to decimal. I don't really know what that means, but that's often what the button says. And so you hit it and it'll change it. Now, if we're doing something like, say, 6/11, and we change that to decimal, it can give you, on some calculators, this one in particular, not every calculator will do this, and you'll see not the TIs that I have don't, I think one of them might, we'll see in a second. But they might give you what repeats, right? And if you hit it again, it's going to give you it just rounded, right? So it's 0.545454545455 because it was rounded, right? And that's how they'll do that on this particular calculator. So you can keep hitting it and changing between those buttons. And that's pretty much the calculator things. Oh, the one other thing is on the TIs, it's kind of the same button generally to do to input a mixed number as it is fraction. I don't think you can do the same button. Let me try something real quick. If we do 6 fraction 2 fraction, yeah. So if we keep hitting this fraction button, then we just keep getting compound fractions and it gets all a huge mess. So in order to input a mixed number, so something like 2 2/5, you actually have to use, we got a little shift again. You have to use shift and then the same fraction button, and it gives you a little mixed number dialog. So like 1 2/5 minus 3/4, right? gives you the answer. You want the decimal, you get that. Now, let's look at a different calculator. So on this TI-30X2S, which is the 2 on this particular calculator, stands for 2-line. In my math classes, if you happen to be joining just for YouTube, in my math classes, I highly recommend a multi-line display, at least 2-line, because that usually guarantees that you can put things in an algebraic way. So, like for example, if on this this is totally off book, but if I want to put square root in here, then I hit second square root of 25, enter. If it's not a multi-line display, like the regular TI-30 or whatever it is, TI-30A or something, you have to put 25 and then push square root, which is not how it's written. So that's the main reason I recommend a multi-line, either 2 or more line. All of these calculators I'm showing fit that bill, of course. Now, the fraction button on this one, you got to kind of look. It's different. There's not any there when you first kind of look at the plate. There's not any fraction button, right? But it actually does have a fraction button. It doesn't have squares. You see, it's right here. Now you notice that it's showing a mixed number. It's showing A and B over C. This one does like what I was saying that Casio doesn't do. So if I want to put 1 and 1/2, I put 1 fraction 2. Now you'll notice on this one, the display, since it's a 2-line display instead of a multi-line display, it shows it a little bit different. So like this is 1.5. So if I hit enter, it's going to give us, and then when it displays a fraction answer, it does 1, U, and then 1/2. So this one displays it a little different, but it does actually display the full fraction, right? So if I want to do 1.5 plus, how about 2/5? Then now this calculator is worth noting. Let's talk about one thing at once. Plus 2/5, enter. Now say I want the decimal equivalent of 1 9/10. Well, for this calculator, it's on the plate. So we hit this second, and it's FD. So fraction to decimal and back again. So second, and then FD, enter. 1.9, second FD, enter, and it gives us 1 9/10, right? So what I was about to say before I decided to stick with where I was is that in this one, on the Casio, I said that you can start it one of two. What you could either push the button and then push the fraction button, or you can put the fraction button and then put that. You're going to see on the other TI, it's the same as that. On this particular calculator, you can't do that. If I hit this, then it's going to get confused. Like because see now there's nothing in the numerator, because that would be to the left over here. So if I do this, 9 and then fraction 2, I think it's going to, it's going to give us an error and say you did it wrong. So for this particular calculator, you have to push numerator, fraction, denominator, enter, right? Or times or multiply or add or subtract or whatever else, whatever you're doing with it, right? Okay, so that's that one. And then finally, this is probably my favorite of the three, although this Casio is pretty interesting as well. That's a new addition to me, so I haven't learned it as well. I'm not used to using Casios, but I've found my way around it fairly well. So for this one, the fraction button lives right here. It's got some of our same sort of things. It does have a mixed number button. So this one, see, it does just like the Casio did, where if I press the regular mixed fraction, that I can't add a mixed number. So to get a mixed number, it works just like the Casio, where I do here and then 5 and 1/3 plus 2/3, enter, and it gives us 6, right? As the answer. So the fraction to decimal button on this one is here. Now this one on the decimal, this is worth noting. If we do like 5 divided by 8, enter, it's going to give us the decimal automatically. Now, one nice thing on this one is it does have the fraction to decimal button up here. It also has this, which is kind of an approximately equal to or toggling between those. It's better on the quote-unquote pro version of this, the 36 or 34. I don't even remember what it is. Whatever it is, my black and silver one, which I don't have handy here. It's got some of the more functions of like the Casio, and it's the way it does fractions is the same as this one. So, but anyway, you can hit this button and it just switches between. It's just a toggle. Bam, 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 right? Switches between 5/8 and 0.625. Easy peasy. So depending on what you want, you can also, of course, hit the second fraction to decimal button, and it's gonna do the same thing. So that's kind of how to put fractions and how to use your fraction button on your calculator. That ought to get you set up with your calculator, even if you don't have one of these particular models. If you have anything like a modern scientific calculator, that should get you go, oh, I forgot. I was going to mention, if you don't have a multi-line, or if you have a little bit older graphing calculator or whatever else, then one thing that's really important, and I'll demonstrate it with this TI-30XS because it's in the middle right now, is that if you want to put 5/6, let's say, and add that to 2/3, it's best practice, and you'll end up with less errors and weird, not syntax errors, but logic errors where you get the wrong answer even though you put the right thing in, if you put it in parentheses. So like parentheses 2 divided by 3 plus parentheses 2 divided by 5, parentheses, enter, right? And you can switch that between the fraction and the decimal and all of those things. So put your fractions in there. If you don't, if you're on like an older or a single line calculator and you got to put a mixed number in, remember that mixed numbers are adding. So if you're on one of those calculators and you want to put 1.5, I would still put it in parentheses, but it'd be 1 plus 1 divided by 2. And actually, on one of those calculators, you'd probably have to do 1 divided by 2 and then plus 1, which it just gets more and more complicated, and you have to think way too much, which is why I recommend a multi-line display calculator. And that is it. I will see you in the next one. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you're one of my students, do your homework. I'll see you in class.